You already know what you should be doing with your money. You have read the articles. You have watched the videos. You have heard the advice about index funds, about not timing the market, about thinking long-term and staying calm when everything drops. You know all of it. And yet, the moment the market falls 3% in a single day, something happens inside you that none of that knowledge can stop. You check your portfolio. You read the headlines. You feel the pull to do something, to move something, to protect something. And even when you do nothing, the anxiety is still there, quietly burning through your focus for the rest of the day. That is not a knowledge problem. That is a thinking problem. Warren Buffett has been investing for over 80 years. He has lived through 14 recessions, multiple market crashes, 2 world wars of economic consequence, the dot-com collapse, the 2008 financial crisis, and a global pandemic that shut down the entire world economy in a matter of weeks. And through every single one of those events, he did not panic. He did not react. In several of those moments, while everyone else was selling, he was buying, not because he had better data, not because he could see the future, but because he built a way of thinking about money that made panic structurally impossible. That is what this video is about. Not what Warren Buffett buys, not which stocks are in his portfolio, or what his latest shareholder letter said. What this video is about is how he thinks. The mental architecture behind every decision he has ever made. The framework that turns market chaos into irrelevant noise and transforms patience from a virtue into the most powerful financial weapon available to any investor. And here is what makes this genuinely remarkable. That framework was not invented by Warren Buffett. He arrived at it through decades of experience, through the influence of his mentor Ben Graham, and through a discipline of mind that he built and refined over a lifetime. But the principles at the core of that framework, the exact reasoning, the exact structure, the exact relationship between the mind and uncertainty, were documented in precise detail over 2,000 years ago by 3 men who never owned a stock, never read a balance sheet, and never heard the word portfolio in their lives. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They did not discover these principles because they were studying finance. They discovered them because they were studying something far more fundamental: how a human mind maintains clarity, discipline, and precision under conditions of maximum uncertainty and pressure. And it turns out that the conditions of maximum uncertainty and pressure that a Roman emperor faced at the edge of the Danube River are not so different from the conditions that an investor faces watching his portfolio drop 40% in 6 weeks. The mind that survives one is built exactly like the mind that survives the other. By the time this video is over, you are going to see that survival, not as a matter of willpower or emotional strength, but as a structural outcome of thinking in a specific way, a way that Warren Buffett mastered, a way that the Stoics documented, and a way that you can understand and begin to apply before this video ends. Let's start with the thing that is costing you the most money right now. And it is not what you think it is. Chapter 1. The Noise and the Signal. What Warren Buffett actually pays attention to. In 1999, at the peak of the dot-com bubble, Warren Buffett was being publicly humiliated, not in private, in print. Barron's ran a cover story questioning whether he had lost his touch. Analysts who had never built anything close to what he had built were explaining with complete confidence that Buffett simply did not understand the new economy, that he was too old, too slow, too attached to outdated principles to compete in a market where technology companies with no earnings were doubling in value every few months. He did not change a single thing. When the bubble collapsed in 2000 and the Nasdaq lost 78% of its value over the next 2 years, Berkshire Hathaway emerged stronger than it had entered the decade. That is not luck. That is a man who had built a precise and deliberate filter between the information that exists in the world and the information that is actually relevant to his decisions. Most investors have no such filter, and that absence is the most expensive thing in their financial lives. Epictetus opens the Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 1, with a statement so direct that most people read it and immediately underestimate it. Some things are in our power. Some things are not. That is the entire framework. And applied to investing, it is the most precise risk management system ever constructed. What is not in your power is the price of any asset on any given day. Central bank decisions, inflation figures, geopolitical events, the behavior of millions of other investors acting simultaneously on their own fears and misunderstandings. Not one variable in that list belongs to you. What is in your power is your savings rate. Your behavior during downturns, which is where the majority of long-term returns are either captured or permanently destroyed. The consistency of your process. The quality of your thinking before you act. Buffett built his entire investment process around exactly that second list. The quality of a business, the competence of its management, the durability of its competitive advantage, and made a structural decision to treat everything outside that framework as irrelevant. Not unimportant to the world, irrelevant to his decisions. The financial information environment is not designed to help you decide better. It is designed to generate engagement. And engagement is produced by urgency, by anxiety, by the feeling that something important is happening right now. And if you do not pay attention, you will be hurt by it. Every alert, every breaking news banner, every analyst downgrade presented as an emergency is operating on that exact mechanism. And that mechanism is the most reliable destroyer of long-term investment returns ever built. The investor who has internalized the Epictetan filter does not check his portfolio 17 times on a day the market drops. Not because he is indifferent, but because the decision about how to respond to volatility was made in advance, in a moment of clarity, before the emotional event arrived. That is not passive. That is the most disciplined form of financial behavior available to any human being. And it leads directly to the quality that Buffett has called the single most important thing an investor can possess. Something that has nothing to do with intelligence, nothing to do with data, and nothing to do with the sophistication of your models. Chapter 2. Temperament is the asset. The investor skill nobody teaches. Warren Buffett has said it in shareholder letters, in interviews, and in conversations with students who traveled to Omaha, specifically to ask him what separates great investors from everyone else. The answer is always a version of the same thing. The most important quality for an investor is temperament, not intellect, not analytical skill, not access to proprietary data, not a sophisticated valuation model or a network of industry contacts. Temperament, the capacity to remain structurally stable while the world around you is generating maximum pressure to react. Most people hear that and nod. Very few understand what it actually means in practice. Here is what it means. In October 2008, at the depth of the financial crisis, the S&P 500 had lost nearly 40% of its value. Banks were failing. The credit markets had frozen. Respected economists were using the word depression in public. The emotional pressure on every investor in the world to sell, to protect what remained, to do something was at a level that most people had never experienced in their financial lives. Buffett published an op-ed in the New York Times titled Buy American. I am. While the consensus was panic, he was deploying capital, not because he knew exactly when the market would recover, but because his temperament was not connected to the emotional weather of the moment. He had built an internal structure that processed market crashes as information rather than as threats. Epictetus addresses this with surgical precision in the Enchiridion. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. A 40% market decline is a fact. The terror it produces is not. The terror is a judgment formed about the fact, and that judgment, Epictetus argues, is always within your power to examine and revise. This is not a call for indifference. Buffett is not indifferent to losses. He takes capital preservation more seriously than almost any investor in history. But there is a precise difference between evaluating a loss clearly and reacting to it emotionally. One produces good decisions. The other produces the kind of behavior that permanently destroys wealth. Selling at the bottom, moving to cash, waiting for certainty that never arrives before re-entering. The market is structurally designed to make emotional reaction feel like rational caution. That is the trap. And temperament, the Stoic kind, built through practice and principle rather than inherited as personality, is the only reliable exit from it. Chapter 3. Patience as a Weapon. How Warren Buffett uses time to beat the market. Warren Buffett bought Coca-Cola in 1988. He still holds it, not because he forgot it was there, not because selling never crossed his mind during the 36 years of volatility, dividend cycles, and market shifts that followed, but because he made a decision about the quality of that business at a specific moment of clarity, and he built a system that protected that decision from the noise that arrived every year afterward trying to undo it. That is not patience in the passive sense. That is patience as a precisely constructed competitive advantage. Most investors treat inaction as the absence of a decision. Buffett treats it as a decision in itself, one that requires as much discipline and conviction as any buy or sell order he has ever placed. In his own words, the stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. That line sounds like a proverb. It is actually a structural description of how capital moves between people who react and people who do not. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations, Book 4, Paragraph 3, about the practice of withdrawing into the rule and reason. He is not describing physical retreat. He is describing the deliberate act of pulling the mind back from the immediate pressure of events into the place where evaluation happens clearly and without distortion. That withdrawal, performed as a daily discipline, is the cognitive foundation of every long holding Buffett has ever made. The decision to hold is made before the pressure arrives, not during it. Consider what actually happens to the average investor during a market downturn. The position drops. The headlines confirm that it is going to drop further. The instinct to protect what remains overrides the original thesis. The position is sold. The market recovers. The investor re-enters at a higher price than the one at which he sold, having permanently destroyed a portion of his capital in the process of trying to save it. That sequence is not stupidity. It is the entirely predictable outcome of making a long-term decision with a short-term nervous system. Buffett solved this problem not with superior willpower, but with superior architecture. He decides in advance what conditions would actually change his thesis on a business, and he defines those conditions precisely and narrowly. Market price is not one of them. Volatility is not one of them. The opinion of analysts is not one of them. This means that when those things arrive, and they always arrive, they have no mechanism to trigger a response. The decision has already been made. The gate is already closed. That is patience as a weapon, and it is available to any investor willing to build the system before the pressure tests it. Chapter 4. The only asset that never compounds back. Time, Seneca, and Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett made his first investment at 11 years old. He has said publicly that one of his greatest regrets is not starting earlier. Let that land for a moment. The man who turned an initial stake into the largest individual investment portfolio in human history believes he started too late, not because he lacked knowledge at 11, but because he understood, earlier than almost anyone, that time is the only variable in the compounding equation that cannot be recovered once it is gone. Every other input can be adjusted. You can increase your savings rate. You can improve your asset allocation. You can reduce your fees and optimize your tax position. But you cannot go back and add years to the beginning of the process. The time that passed before you started is gone permanently. And in a compounding system, the earliest years are structurally the most valuable ones. Seneca opens Letters on Ethics, Letter 1, with a statement that has nothing to do with finance and everything to do with it. Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is alien to us. Time alone is ours. He wrote that as a philosophical observation about how human beings squander the one resource that cannot be replenished. He was writing about attention, about distraction, about the habit of living as though time were infinite and therefore treatable as expendable. Buffett arrived at the same conclusion through a completely different path. Not philosophy, but mathematics. The compounding tables he studied as a teenager showed him with arithmetic clarity what Seneca had articulated through reason 2,000 years earlier. The resource that matters most is the one most people treat as though it costs nothing. Two men, 2,000 years apart, one equation. The practical consequence for any investor is uncomfortable but precise. Every year you delay starting is not simply a year of returns lost. It is a year of compounding lost, which means the loss grows larger every subsequent year for the rest of your investment horizon. A 25-year-old and a 35-year-old investing identical amounts at identical returns do not end up with results that are 10 years apart. They end up with results that are worlds apart, because the earliest decade of compounding does work that no later decade can replicate. Seneca's framing makes this visceral in a way that spreadsheets cannot. Time is not a resource you are saving. It is a resource you are spending every day, whether you choose to invest it wisely or not. The question is never whether time will pass. The question is what the passing of time will have been made to do. Buffett answered that question at 11 years old. The Stoics answered it 2 millennia before him. The answer has not changed. Chapter 5, Rule Number 1. How Warren Buffett Thinks About Loss and Capital Protection. Warren Buffett's 2 rules of investing are among the most quoted lines in the history of finance. Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. Most people hear that and smile, assuming it is a clever way of saying be careful. It is not. It is a precise philosophical distinction between 2 types of negative outcomes that the average investor treats as identical, but that have completely different consequences for long-term wealth. The first type is temporary loss. A position drops 30% during a market correction. The business is still sound. The thesis is still intact. The price will recover because the underlying value was never impaired. This is not a loss in any meaningful sense. It is volatility wearing the costume of a loss. The second type is permanent destruction of capital. The business fails. The thesis was wrong. The money is gone, and no amount of time or patience will bring it back. This is an actual loss, and it is categorically different from the first type in every way that matters. Buffett's rule is about the second type exclusively. He is not telling investors to avoid volatility. He is telling them to avoid the situations where the capital itself is permanently impaired, where there is no recovery possible because the underlying value has been genuinely destroyed. Marcus Aurelius draws exactly this distinction in Meditations, Book 5. He returns repeatedly to the question of what actually constitutes harm. His answer is consistent and precise. An obstacle that can be overcome is not harm. A setback that can be reversed is not harm. What constitutes genuine harm is the permanent destruction of the capacity to act, to reason, to pursue what is good. Everything else is temporary weather. Applied to capital, the Aurelius framework produces a remarkably clear decision filter. Before entering any position, the question is not, will this go down? The question is, can this go to zero and stay there? If the answer is yes, the risk is real in the Buffett sense. If the answer is no, if the underlying business is sound and the price decline is purely a function of market sentiment, then the volatility is noise, and the rule has not been violated. Most investors lose money, not because they take genuine risks, but because they cannot distinguish between the two categories in the moment of maximum emotional pressure. When a position is down 40% and the headlines are catastrophic, temporary loss and permanent destruction feel identical. The nervous system does not care about the distinction. The philosophy does. That distinction, held clearly and applied consistently, is the difference between an investor who compounds wealth over decades and one who repeatedly resets to zero every time the market tests his convictions. Buffett has held that distinction for over 80 years. The Stoics built the framework for holding it 2,000 years before him. The mechanism is the same. The outcome is the same. And the work required to build it is available to anyone willing to do it. How Warren Buffett's money mindset works while everyone else just reacts. Warren Buffett has never called himself a Stoic. He has never cited Marcus Aurelius in a shareholder letter or referenced Epictetus in an interview. He built his framework through decades of experience, through the influence of Ben Graham, and through a discipline of mind that he developed and refined across 80 years of investing in real markets with real consequences. And yet every principle at the core of that framework was documented with precise and exhaustive detail by three men who lived 2,000 years before the first stock exchange existed. That is not a coincidence. It is evidence of something far more important than a historical curiosity. It means these principles are not a philosophy. They are not a school of thought or an intellectual tradition that you can choose to follow or ignore based on personal preference. They are a description of how a human mind actually functions at its best under conditions of uncertainty, pressure, and consequence. Buffett did not borrow from the Stoics. He rediscovered them because the truth they documented does not belong to any century. It belongs to the structure of the problem itself. The problem of how to think clearly when everything around you is designed to make you react. You now have the 5 principles that form the architecture of that thinking. The filter that separates signal from noise before it reaches your decisions. The understanding that temperament is not a personality trait, but a system that can be built. The discipline of patience, not as waiting, but as a precisely constructed competitive advantage. The recognition that time is the only input in the compounding equation that cannot be recovered once spent. And the distinction between temporary loss and permanent destruction of capital, the most important line in investing that almost nobody draws correctly. In the moment it matters most. These are not motivational ideas. They are operational tools. Buffett uses them every day. The Stoics built them to last forever. And the distance between knowing them and applying them is exactly the distance between the investor you are right now and the investor you are capable of becoming. That distance is not closed by more information. You already have enough information. It is closed by building the mental architecture that processes information differently, calmly, precisely, and without the interference of reactions you never chose and never examined. That is the work. And it starts with a decision that has nothing to do with the market. If this way of thinking about wealth and philosophy is what you are looking for, subscribe to the Stoic Compound. New videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Built for the investor who wants to think better, not just know more. And leave a comment below with the principle from this video that hit closest to home. The answers always show me where to go next.